everyone, this is Tim. It is Monday evening, the 22nd of February, and I'm making this video as a follow-up on my recent road trip that I returned from last night. This trip was not only very enjoyable, but was also very revealing, and so I want to talk about it. But basically the following day after making my last video, I did meet up with everybody. We met up at the Epcot Center and we had lunch at the French restaurant. The way Epcot is laid out, if you don't know, is there's different national themes around the park. Germany, France, what have you. So we went to France for lunch, and it was just a wonderful time. And before getting into that, I just found it kind of ironic that I had to produce a government-based ID to get into Epcot, and I thought that was rather amusing. I was talking at the girl working the ticket booth that I said, isn't it interesting that you have to provide ID to get into Disneyland but not to vote? It makes me wonder which one is the capitalist dream come true and which one is the Magic Kingdom. She was like, yeah, good point. So, but anyway, at lunch, I noticed something that I thought was very encouraging, and that is that in the past I've had different jobs and worked for a couple different companies, and some of these places would have a like a Christmas holiday dinner event, and guys would bring their wives, and I would notice that some of the people that didn't work there that were guests, some of them sometimes felt a certain detachment because they didn't work there and they didn't know anybody there apart from their spouse, and others were able to blend in more easily. But at this particular meetup, several people had brought somebody with them, and I didn't notice anybody feeling detached or alienated in our group. It's like everybody, from as far as I could tell, everybody blended in and nobody felt like they were a stranger. And that just, I appreciated that very much. I think that's just another testament to just how awesome Hex is. And because Hex is just a computer program, there's no reason for people to see themselves as better than somebody else just because they're not utilizing the program just yet. So that to me was just a highlight of the whole trip. And we left after lunch and we just walked around as a group, and we all talked and stopped at different places for different things. And somebody brought a handful of stickers that managed to get plastered different places. I was just wondering when security was going to catch up with us and throw us out for vandalizing Disney World. But the real kicker there was near the end of the evening. One of the last things we did is we went on this ride that was you get in this car, and it was this racetrack that you ride around in, and it was co-sponsored by Chevrolet. So when you get off the ride and you get out, they dump you into a showroom that has all kinds of Chevys, and of course right in the center is the brand new 2021 Corvette, which I got to admit was a pretty hot-looking car. And I was asking, who's going to take one for the team by slapping a Hex sticker on the hood of this car? snapping a picture of it. And we love Hex, but none of us were willing to go to jail over it. So, but it was good. So, some of the guys stuck around afterwards and the next day, but I left the next morning, Thursday morning, because I had already arranged to meet with two of my classmates. One of them lives in St. Augustine, Florida, so got there right before lunch. We visited for a little bit. We went out to lunch at this really neat place that was right there at the water, and breeze, mist, great food. It was awesome. I can see why people like moving to Florida. And so our visit was cut a little short because he had a phone call to make, so after lunch I just moved on. But based on how long it took me to get to Charleston, South Carolina, where I was visiting my other classmate, it actually worked out, because I got there right around dinner time and contacted him and said, hey, you want to meet up someplace for dinner? He said, sure. He's like, what are you in a mood for? I said, I hadn't had Asian in a long time. He sent me a link. He's like, how's this? I said, great. He's like, okay, let me know when you're 5 minutes away. So I did, and we met up around 6:30 that evening. And, we're eating and visiting and just catching up on life and stuff. And during the course of our conversation, he mentions the name of a mutual interest, a girl. And I asked him about a picture that I saw on his Facebook page several years ago of him and her, and he had put a caption under the picture, and I knew it was from a particular TV show, but I didn't see that episode, so I wanted to know the backstory. I suppose I could have just Googled it and figured it out, but I thought I'd just wait until whenever the day would come that I would meet up with him and just ask him. So I did, and that led to some more question and observation about this particular girl. And finally he's like, you're being awfully inquisitive about her. It's like, do you like her? And I said, well, to let you know, I said I had a mad crush on her in junior high school, and I had the perfect opportunity that anyone could have wished for to do something about it, and the fact is I chickened out. And if it was just a matter of walking away and moving on, that would have been the end of it. But in this case, it wasn't the end of it. And he's like, why is that? So I told him that afterwards I just went into this pit of self-pity, and I was over at my best friend's house sometime after this and just wallowing in my stuff and whining about wishing I was dead. And my friend, whom I had just become acquainted with that year, so I didn't know him growing up, he just was fed up with me, and he ran into the kitchen and grabbed a steak knife and came charging at me. He's like, you want to die so much, I'm going to kill you. And I was taking him serious, so I charged him, and we're fighting, and I tried to wrestle this knife out of his hand, and I grabbed his wrist, and he pulled his wrist away, and the blade went into my thumb, and blood started shooting everywhere. I'm like screaming, like, you stabbed me. He's like, well, you're crying all the time. And so of course he's finding this rather amusing, and I said, but wait, it gets worse. His mom comes home eventually, and I'm in the bathroom because I knew first aid, so I'm treating this wound on my thumb, and there's blood all over the bathroom sink. She's like, what happened? So we're both telling her each side of the story of what happened. She's just like rolling her eyes. She's like, let me see your thumb. And I took the towels off that I was using, And she was like, I'm taking you to the hospital, you need stitches. And I just go into this panic mode, and I'm like, no, no, there cannot be a public record of this at all. And I'm like, I know how to treat this. I'll make sure it doesn't get infected. I'll make sure it heals up just fine. This is all my fault. And she eventually conceded. And, but I'm just like, the truth of what happened here could never leave this room, ever. I told my friend, I'm like, if anybody ever asks what happened, it's like, you tell them I was with my cousin in Downingtown, and we got jumped, and somebody pulled a knife, and we all got into a fight, and I got stabbed. And so I'm telling my friend this over dinner, and he's like, so whatever became of all this? And I just said, I just buried it. I forgot it ever happened. Or at least I thought. But the fact of the matter is, I told him, it's like, this has actually had followed me my whole life, because I just have this constant reminder, my body's permanently scarred because of this. Eventually, though, later in life, something happened to me that showed me that I needed to finish this, because it was bad enough that I had coerced my best friend to agreeing with a lie, but threatening him, not allowing the truth to be told and threatening him because of that was actually really evil. And, when people are accustomed to lying, they would just look at this situation, just think it's just some, juvenile thing that's not worth making a big deal over. But by this time in my life, lying wasn't an option anymore. It's like, when you're about telling the truth and you've got this, following you, it's a big deal. So the time had come where it was time to be resolved of it. And it was obvious that the only way this was going to get resolved is the truth needed to come out, which meant I needed to contact this girl and tell her, what happened. So my friend over dinner is like, so what did that look like? And so I told him that a few years prior to contacting her in 2012, I had actually saw her at a class reunion, and I talked to her for a few minutes and asked her if it was okay to friend request her on Facebook, and she said sure. So I had a means of communicating with her, and what I did is, when this time came, I just sent her a message saying, do you remember being in 8th grade science with me? Because the way that the classroom was arranged, our desks were not in rows, they were in squares of 4, so because we worked in groups, we happened to be in the same group. And she was like, I can't say that I do remember. So I said, well, basically, there was a day when you and I were both absent, and there was a test, and we both had to make up this test, so the teacher put us alone together in a supply room so we could take this test. And she's like, no, I don't remember that. And I'm like, well, I do. And the fact of the matter is, something happened after that you probably don't know about, but I need to tell you. And I was wondering if I could send you an explanation, if you would be willing to take the time to read it. You don't have to respond to it, but I would appreciate it if you took the time to read it. And she said, sure. So I wrote to her and I told her what happened, why it happened, and why am I waiting almost 20 years later to tell her about it. So he was like, okay, so did she tell you if she read it? Did you get a response? And I said, yes, I did, as a matter of fact. And she told me she was surprised that I could write something so heartfelt and genuine and emotional, and that she was going to call me that weekend to talk about it. And he's like, and? And I'm like, well, she never called. And eventually I followed up with her to ask her what was going on, and she said that she was not going to call me, and if I ever wrote to her again, she would not respond. And of course, he's like, what? Huh? Why? I don't know. Didn't ask. Don't care. I said what I needed to say. I just wrote back to her and I said, okay, thank you. Wish you well. So, and uh, as far as I know, that was the end of it. But anyway, he also asked me, he's like, well, how did you handle that? You know, that seems kind of abrupt. And I told him that the fact is it didn't hit me as hard as I thought it would, but the fact is I did do something as a result, and what I did is I permanently deleted my Facebook page, because at that point in my life I just felt like I really just didn't deserve to have any friends. I just, you know, just felt was in a really low place. And I found out that, you know, Facebook is kind of like Hotel California. You know, you can check out, but you can never leave. Getting your Facebook page permanently deleted and having all of your data wiped is not easy. It's actually like a 5-step process. I had to Google it and follow a whole list of instructions to have it done, but I did get it done. And I realized about a year and a half later that, you know, I just basically abandoned 200 friends, and, you know, maybe somebody actually cared that, you know, what happened to me. So I did start up another Facebook page sometime in 2013, and just for the longest time I didn't send out any friend requests. I just accepted them as they came in. And so anyway, it was after that time that I saw this picture of my classmate with this girl, and that's why I was wanting to know the backstory. And the fact of the matter is, at first I was jealous to see this, but fortunately it passed, because I was, like I said, I was finished with all this. And but I was curious. So after his explanation behind this picture, it was obvious to both of us that it really wasn't anything worth being jealous about. So I felt that, you know, meeting up with this person was probably, it was about as successful as I could have wanted it to be, because I did want to talk about this, but I didn't want to be the one to bring it up, because I just didn't want to risk becoming jealous. It's like, you know, some people, I was talking about this with my other classmate in Florida, that, you know, people, it's like some people, they never seem to really get out of high school. They have this, it's like they're stuck. You know, you talk to them and it's like they never got out. And he had dealt with that with somebody. And you know, I realized from my own experiences that has a tendency to happen when you have unfinished business with somebody, and you just, you know, you don't do anything about it. And I didn't want to risk being that type of person with this other person I was visiting with, because, you know, in junior high school, him and I, we were in the same gym class, and we played soccer together. He was the goalie and I was one of the defenders. So, you know, I considered him quite a friend, even though in high school we basically didn't talk at all because we had different interests. And but I never had any hard feelings towards him. So anyway, at this point, I grab my phone and I start, you know, looking at an app, and he looks over. He's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, you know, I need to start looking for reservations if I'm going to get a hotel for the night." And he's like, "I told you I have an extra room at my house. You can stay there." I'm like, "Well, a few drinks ago, you said you were going to be spending the night with your girl and that room wasn't available." He's like, "Don't worry about it. I already took care of that." He's like, You're staying the night at my place." And I was like, thanks. That's it actually is it's actually very meaningful. So a few seconds later, we're sitting there. He's like, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure." He's like, "People can change, right?" And I'm like, "Of course." He's like, "Well, let's just suppose that this girl called you right now and she was like, thus and so." He's like, "How would you respond to that?" I said, "I know exactly how I would respond." And I told him. He just rolled his eyes and slammed his drink on the bar. He tells the barmaid who's standing right there, he's like, "Get me another one of these. We're going to be here for a while." He was right. We were there for a while. From the time we sat down till the time we left, it was about 4 hours, and we were like the last people to leave this place. And he's like, "I only live 2 minutes away." So we had a very lively discussion about life and girls and getting results. And it was really something. Of course, he did a lot of the talking because he was going to inform me on things. And I let him because it's like, hey, I ain't too proud to receive instruction. And I mean, this is basically what Richard does when he does his live streams. He doesn't just sit around and talk about hex all day. He gets into, markets and health and longevity and girls. And, he wrote a book, after he toured the world and, basically, this is, do this and you dress this way if you want to get results. And so it's like, I'm used to this. So it was great. And so anyway, went back to his place. It doesn't end there. I go back to his place, get into bed, and I'm about 2 minutes from falling asleep, and suddenly I hear footsteps coming up the staircase. and I'm like, that sounds like the footsteps of a scorned woman to me. And then suddenly I hear a guy's voice. He's like, "Hey man, get out of bed!" And I'm like, yo, what's going on here? I'm looking around this room like, do I need to brandish a weapon? Am I going to have to jump this guy? Who is this? But it was obvious, my friend knew who this was. He's like, "How'd you get in my house?" He's like, "You left the door unlocked. Come on, let's go party." He's like, "I'm done for the night. Go away." So, even though the meetup the day before was the reason for this trip, and it was great, and I can hardly wait for the next one, the fact is, this conversation, everything that went down with this classmate and I really needed that, because it just, him and I never really like sat down and talked before. It's like I didn't know how many brothers and sisters he had or anything about his family hardly. It's like, we just happened to go to school together, but it's like, after that night, I just felt like, this guy was like one of, a great friend. And, he's like, "You got to come back again when the weather's better and you have more time, and I can show you around Charleston and all this stuff." And it's like, yeah, I'm actually looking forward to it. I consider that a priority. So it just seemed like after I made the last video, the trip just got better and better from that point on. I mean, I was a little bummed out after I made that video because it's like I didn't have any plans the rest of the day. I ended up sitting in the hotel room for about 3 hours reading a book until somebody else showed up that was part of our meetup. So, we hung out for a little bit, and then he left to go to the bar, and I just went to bed soon afterwards. So, anyway, the next morning, Friday morning, I leave my friend's house, and I make my way up to Greenville, South Carolina, to meet up with another Hexican who didn't make it to the Orlando meetup. And he goes by the name of Abracadabra on Twitter. And I didn't know anything about this person. Just, we talked a few times on Twitter, and when he told me he was in South Carolina, and he, I just told him, hey, I'll make it a trip. I'll just stop by and see you too on my way home. So we meet at this, we meet at a restaurant for lunch, and he asked me how the drive was getting up, and the fact was it was actually more dangerous leaving South Carolina than it was driving into Florida, just because of all the rain and the fact that people in the South are not very mindful of traffic when they change lanes. They just go. They don't seem to look in their rearview mirror or use turn signals. They just drift over, and if you're in their way, too bad, you get hit. So you need intuition to drive in the South, I've learned. So anyway, I told him, but despite running through all the ice in Texas, it wasn't that bad. It's like, at least in Pennsylvania, where I'm originally from, they do salt the roads. He was like, oh, really? I'm from Pennsylvania too. I'm like, really? Where in Pennsylvania are you from? He's like, oh, just this little place called Spring City. And I'm like, Spring City? Really? I'm like, I'm from Phoenixville. I'm your neighbor practically. He was like, oh, wow. Small world. So that was just pretty awesome. It's like, what are the chances, of running into a total stranger who happens to be from the next town over? So we just, it made for a great lunch, and had a plant-based Philadelphia cheesesteak that was awesome. And so that just made lunch that much more better. And so I left there, drove to Arkansas, got a hotel room, ice all over the roads, going through northern Alabama and Mississippi, and even into parts of Memphis before, stopping for the night in Arkansas. And so let's see. So yeah, just spent all day on the road Saturday driving home, and all day Sunday. And actually, I got home late Sunday afternoon. I got home fairly early. And so yeah, that was the trip, and it was great. I can hardly wait to do another one. Might be going to Denver in May, so we'll see. But yeah, part of the reason of bringing all this up and going into so much detail about my whole experience with this girl, and my classmate asking me about how I would deal with it if she called me back, is because some of us in Hex, especially some of you younger guys, you may be getting calls in the future when people find out what Hex shares are, and they find out that you've got a dolphin-sized stack of them. You might get some phone calls from your past, who knows. And you need to recognize when people are being genuine with you and when they're not. So fortunately, communication is an art, and when you become honest, you can use communication to make other people become honest. So it's worth learning. So anyway, uh, you all have a good night. I think this is this is the longest video I've ever made. I'm going on a half hour here. So um, we'll see what the future holds, but it's going to be good one way or another. So anyway, see you later. Bye.